The coastal town of Havenwood had a quiet charm that Dana Whitlock couldn't ignore. Nestled between jagged cliffs and a foggy harbor, it was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. Dana parked her old Jeep on the edge of Main Street, stepping out into the brisk afternoon air. She adjusted her leather jacket and glanced around. Locals meandered down the sidewalks, nodding politely to one another. But there was an underlying tension she couldn't quite place. Dana wasn't here by accident. For years, she had served as a Special Forces commander, leading covert missions into hostile territories, but the last operation had left scars deeper than the ones visible on her skin. Her team had been betrayed, ambushed in an operation gone horribly wrong. After leaving the military, she thought Havenwood might be a place where she could finally find peace. But as she stood there, observing the subtle unease etched on the faces of the townspeople, her instincts told her she'd walked into a different kind of battlefield. She made her way to Sam's Diner, a small, weathered establishment with a faded red and white sign creaking in the wind. The smell of fresh coffee and grilled cheese sandwiches greeted her as she entered. "Welcome," said Sophie, the waitress, flashing a tired smile. She looked about Dana's age, with kind eyes that didn't quite match the tension in her voice. Dana slid into a booth near the window and ordered a black coffee. As Sophie brought it over, Dana noticed the waitress's hands trembling slightly. "Everything okay?" Dana asked casually, her sharp eyes meeting Sophie's. Sophie hesitated, glancing toward the door before nodding. "Just the usual. Small-town problems." But Dana wasn't convinced. She'd seen too many people try to hide fear. It was the same look soldiers wore when they were outnumbered and outgunned, but still trying to keep their composure. Before Dana could press further, the bell above the diner door jingled, and 3 men walked in, dressed in leather jackets with the insignia of a black iron fong emblazoned on the back. They moved with the kind of swagger that suggested they owned the place. The leader, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, scanned the room before locking eyes with Sophie. "Afternoon, sweetheart," he drawled, leaning against the counter. "Got my coffee ready?" Sophie froze but managed a forced smile. "Coming right up, Jake." Jake and his 2 companions made their way to a booth, but their presence was anything but subtle. They laughed loudly, slapped the table, and made it a point to glance at the other patrons in the diner, daring anyone to say something. Dana watched them carefully, her military training kicking in. Their movements were deliberate, their body language screamed intimidation, and their patches marked them as members of the Iron Fong Motorcycle Club. Dana had encountered similar gangs before, thugs who pretended to be soldiers but lacked the discipline or loyalty. Sophie returned to Dana's table, her face pale. "You should probably finish your coffee and leave. They don't like strangers." Dana raised an eyebrow. "Do they usually get what they want?" Sophie glanced nervously over her shoulder, lowering her voice. "They've been running things around here for months. Protection money, threats. If someone resists, accidents happen." Dana's jaw tightened. She had heard these stories before in other small towns. Groups like the Iron Fong thrived in isolated communities, preying on fear and the lack of resources to fight back. As Sophie walked away, Jake's booming voice filled the diner. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out to Sophie, who flinched at the sound. "Bring some pie, too. And don't forget a smile this time." Dana's patience snapped. She stood and walked toward the counter, her boots clicking against the tiled floor. She could feel the eyes of the entire diner on her, but she didn't care. "You know," Dana said, her voice calm but firm, "most men with manners wait for the waitress to bring their food before barking orders." Jake turned slowly, his scar twisting as he grinned. "And who the hell are you?" "Just someone who doesn't appreciate bullies," Dana replied, standing her ground. The diner grew deathly silent. Jake's grin faded as he sized her up, his hand twitching toward the knife on his belt. Dana noticed it, but didn't flinch. "Careful, lady," Jake said, his voice low. "You don't know who you're messing with." "No," Dana said evenly, her gaze locking onto his. "But I know your type. All bark until someone pushes back." One of Jake's companions rose, but Jake held up a hand, stopping him. He stared at Dana for a long moment before letting out a laugh. "You've got guts," he said, leaning back in his seat. But don't think you can walk into my town and start running your mouth. Dana leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. We'll see whose town it is. She turned and walked back to her booth, her calm demeanor never wavering. Jake watched her go, his jaw clenched, but he didn't follow. After a tense moment, Sophie hurried over to Dana's table, whispering urgently, "You shouldn't have done that. They don't let things like this go." Dana smiled faintly. "Good." Sophie's eyes widened, but before she could respond, the bikers got up and left, their heavy boots echoing against the diner floor. Jake shot Dana a parting glare before stepping outside. Dana stayed seated, watching through the window as the bikers mounted their motorcycles and roared off toward the harbor. She finished her coffee in silence, already piecing together her next move. Outside, the quiet returned to Havenwood, but Dana knew it wouldn't last. She wasn't here to stay out of trouble. Trouble had already found her, and she intended to fight back. The quiet streets of Havenwood were deceptive. Dana Whitlock drove her Jeep along the narrow road that led toward the harbor, her mind racing with the details she'd uncovered in the diner. The Ironfong MC wasn't just a group of unruly bikers. They were something far more organized, far more dangerous. She pulled off to the side of the road at a high point overlooking the docks. From this vantage, she could see the sprawling harbor below, its waters churning under a brisk wind. A cluster of warehouses sat at the far end, dimly lit by flickering security lights. Near one of the larger buildings, Dana spotted a group of bikers standing around a shipment of crates. She adjusted the small pair of binoculars she kept in her jacket pocket and zoomed in. The crates were unmarked, but the way they were handled spoke volumes. The bikers worked with military precision, moving in practiced patterns that Dana recognized immediately. She noted their weapons. Several of them had sidearms, poorly concealed under their jackets, while two stood guard with automatic rifles slung over their shoulders. Her heart sank as her training kicked in. This wasn't some local gang flexing its muscles. This was an organized operation. Dana's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she answered without looking at the screen. "You're not from around here." The voice on the other end was calm, almost casual. Dana frowned. "Who's this?" "I could ask you the same question. Word travels fast in Havenwood, especially when someone stirs the pot." She didn't reply, her mind working rapidly to place the voice. It was deep, gravelly, and familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. "You don't remember me, do you, Commander?" The blood drained from Dana's face. "Lucius Kane." There was a low chuckle on the other end of the line. "It's been a while." Dana gripped the steering wheel tightly, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the docks. "I thought you were dead." "I might as well have been, after what you did," Lucius replied, his voice laced with bitterness. "But I'm alive, and I've been busy. Turns out betrayal can be quite motivating." Dana exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. "Betrayal? You were the one who went off mission, who endangered the team. Is that what they told you?" Lucius's tone sharpened. "You left me to die, Dana. And now, I'm here to return the favor." The line went dead, leaving Dana gripping the phone tightly. She stared at the docks, her mind spinning. Later that evening, Dana made her way to the sheriff's office. She needed intel, and while she didn't trust many people in Havenwood yet, she had a hunch about Deputy Ethan Hayes. The station was small and quiet, its walls lined with faded wanted posters and a few outdated plaques. Ethan sat behind the front desk, looking up as Dana entered. He was young, mid-30s, with a boyish face that didn't quite match the weary expression in his eyes. "Deputy," Dana said, nodding. "Ma'am," Ethan replied cautiously. "What can I do for you?" Dana leaned on the counter. "I need to know everything you've got on the Ironfong MC." Ethan's jaw tightened, and he glanced over his shoulder toward the sheriff's office, the door slightly ajar. "That's a dangerous subject to poke around in," he said quietly. "I'm not poking," Dana replied firmly. "I'm digging." Ethan hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. "They've been running things for months. Extortion, smuggling. Word is they've got connections way beyond this town." Dana studied him carefully. "And you've done nothing?" Ethan stiffened. "It's not that simple. We don't have the manpower to take them on." And, he trailed off, his eyes flicking nervously toward the office door again. And what? Dana pressed. Ethan sighed, his shoulders slumping. They've got people in high places. The mayor, maybe even higher. Every time we've tried to build a case, it gets shut down before it goes anywhere. Dana's lips thinned. You're scared. Ethan bristled. I'm not scared for me. I'm scared for my sister. She's the only family I've got, and if I step out of line, they'll make sure something happens to her. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Dana felt a pang of sympathy. She had seen this kind of fear before. Good people caught in impossible situations. I'm not here to judge you, Dana said softly, but I need your help. What do you know about the shipment at the harbor? Ethan's eyes widened. You don't want to get involved in that. Whatever's in those crates, it's big. Bigger than anything they've moved before. That's exactly why I need to know, Dana replied. Ethan hesitated, then pulled a folder from his desk drawer. He opened it and flipped through several pages of reports before sliding one across to Dana. It was a grainy photo of Lucius Kane, taken at the docks. This is their leader, Ethan said. He doesn't come into town often, but when he does, something big usually follows. Dana stared at the photo, her chest tightening. Lucius looked older, more weathered, but the hard edge in his eyes was unmistakable. Thanks, Dana said, tucking the report under her arm. And deputy? Yeah. Keep your sister safe. I'll take care of the rest. That night, Dana sat in her motel room, poring over the reports Ethan had given her. Each page painted a picture of a well-oiled machine, a criminal network that operated with military precision. The deeper she read, the more connections she began to piece together. The Iron Fang MC wasn't just a biker gang. They were part of something much larger, something that reached beyond Havenwood. Her phone buzzed again, and this time the message was text only. You should have stayed out of it, Commander. Now you've made it personal. Okay. Dana's lips curled into a grim smile as she set the phone down. Good, she muttered to herself. Let's keep it personal. The morning fog clung to the streets of Havenwood as Dana Whitlock made her way down Main Street, her thoughts preoccupied with what she'd uncovered. The Iron Fang MC wasn't just a nuisance. It was the tip of a much larger network. Lucius Kane's reappearance wasn't just personal. It was the linchpin in a conspiracy that had roots far deeper than Havenwood's quiet coastal community. Her destination this time was Havenwood's town hall. If the Iron Fang MC operated with impunity, someone in local government had to be enabling them. Mayor Philip Grant was the obvious candidate. As she pushed through the heavy oak doors, she felt the air shift, a mix of polished professionalism and quiet fear. Can I help you? A young receptionist asked, glancing up from her desk. I need to speak with the mayor, Dana said, her tone firm but polite. The receptionist hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. He's in a meeting right now. It won't take long, Dana interrupted, giving the woman a look that brooked no argument. The receptionist reluctantly picked up the phone, murmured something, and then nodded toward a set of double doors. Go ahead. Philip Grant's office was a caricature of political success. Dark mahogany furniture, framed degrees on the wall, and photographs of Grant shaking hands with various state officials. The man himself, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with graying hair, stood behind his desk as Dana entered, a carefully constructed smile on his face. Ms. Whitlock, isn't it? He greeted, extending a hand. Welcome to Havenwood. I hear you've been making quite an impression around town. Dana ignored the hand and took a seat without being asked. Let's cut to the chase, Mayor. You've got a biker gang running roughshod over this town, and from what I can see, you're either turning a blind eye or actively helping them. The smile faltered, but Grant quickly recovered. I assure you, I'm doing everything in my power to maintain law and order. Dana leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Save the political spin. I saw Iron Fang cease operation at the docks. The way they move, the resources they have, it's not something they could pull off without someone in power covering for them. Is it you? Grant's jaw tightened, and his hands gripped the edge of his desk. For a moment, Dana thought he might deny everything, but then his face softened into a mask of weary resignation. You don't understand, he said, lowering his voice. They came here months ago. At first, it was small, just a few bikers causing trouble. But then they started bringing money. They offered protection, investments, ways to make Havenwood grow. This town was struggling, Ms. Whitlock. People were losing their businesses, their homes. What was I supposed to do? Turn them away? Funny how their investments involve threats and extortion, Dana shot back. Or are you getting a cut of that, too? Grant's eyes flared with indignation. I did what I had to do to protect this town. If you think that makes me a bad man, so be it. But if you push them too far, you'll be putting everyone in Havenwood in danger. That's not your decision to make, Dana said coldly, standing up. Your job is to protect the people, not sell them out. Before Grant could respond, Dana turned and walked out, her mind already working on the next piece of the puzzle. Later that night, Dana sat in her Jeep parked near the docks, watching the shadows move across the waterfront. The Ironfong MC was busy unloading crates from a cargo ship, their movements precise and calculated. She raised her binoculars again, her heart skipping a beat when she saw one of the crates being opened. Inside were rows of canisters, each marked with biohazard symbols. Dana's stomach tightened. This wasn't just about weapons. This was something far worse. Her phone buzzed, and she answered without taking her eyes off the scene. Sophie? I found something, Sophie whispered on the other end. Meet me at the diner in 20 minutes. Dana hesitated, torn between staying to gather more intel and following up on Sophie's lead. She decided Sophie's information might help her make sense of what she was seeing. The diner was nearly empty when Dana arrived, save for Sophie, who sat in a corner booth with a laptop open in front of her. Her usual friendly demeanor had been replaced by a tense focus. What did you find? Dana asked, sliding into the booth. Sophie turned the laptop around, showing a map with several red markers. These are properties around Havenwood that have been bought up in the last 6 months. Most of them were purchased by a shell company called Blackfall Industries. And Blackfall Industries is a front, Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly. It's tied to an international arms dealer named Marcus Vane. The name hit Dana like a punch to the gut. Marcus Vane? Sophie nodded. You know him? Dana's hands clenched into fists. He's my ex-husband. Sophie stared at her, stunned. You're kidding. I wish I was, Dana said bitterly. What else do you have? Sophie pulled up another file. There's more. The crates at the docks, they're not just carrying weapons. There are reports that they're transporting something called Project Ironstorm. It's biological. Dana sat back, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. Marcus wasn't just involved. He was orchestrating this entire operation. Before Dana could fully process the implications, the diner door opened, and a man in a leather jacket walked in. He didn't glance around, didn't acknowledge Sophie or Dana. He simply walked to the counter, ordered coffee, and sat down. But Dana's instinct screamed at her. She recognized the way he carried himself, the slight bulge under his jacket where a gun was concealed, the purposeful way he moved. This wasn't a local. She leaned towards Sophie, keeping her voice low. We've been made. Do you have a back exit? Sophie nodded, her face pale. Through the kitchen. Go, Dana said, sliding out of the booth. I'll handle this. Sophie hesitated but obeyed, disappearing into the back. Dana stood, her hand resting on the knife concealed in her jacket. The man at the counter turned, his gaze meeting hers. His expression was neutral, but Dana saw the faintest flicker of recognition in his eyes. You're not from around here, Dana said calmly, taking a step closer. Neither are you, the man replied. Dana's lips twitched into a humorless smile. Let me guess. Lucius sent you? The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached for something under his jacket. Dana moved before he could, her hand darting out to grab his wrist, slamming it against the counter. His gun clattered to the floor as she twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him down. Tell Lucius I'm coming for him, she hissed. The man groaned but didn't answer. Dana released him with a shove, grabbing his gun and pocketing it as she walked out the front door. The war in Havenwood had just begun, and Dana intended to end it on her terms. The storm rolling over Havenwood mirrored the chaos in Dana Whitlock's mind. Rain lashed against her Jeep's windshield as she drove back to her motel, the events of the last 24 hours playing on repeat in her head. Marcus Vane, her ex-husband, wasn't just involved in the Ironfang MC's operations, he was running them. The man she'd once trusted was now orchestrating a global conspiracy, one that had brought weapons and possibly biological threats to her doorstep. As she parked in front of the motel, she noticed Sophie waiting for her under the awning, a hoodie pulled tightly around her face to shield her from the rain. Sophie's laptop was tucked under her arm, and her expression was a mixture of determination and fear. "Get inside," Dana called, motioning toward her room. Ethan bristled. "I'm not scared for me. I'm scared for my sister. She's the only family I've got, and if I step out of line, they'll make sure something happens to her." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Dana felt a pang of sympathy. She had seen this kind of fear before. Good people caught in impossible situations. "I'm not here to judge you," Dana said softly, "but I need your help. What do you know about the shipment at the harbor?" Ethan's eyes widened. "You don't want to get involved in that. Whatever's in those crates, it's big. Bigger than anything they've moved before." "That's exactly why I need to know," Dana replied. Ethan hesitated, then pulled a folder from his desk drawer. He opened it and flipped through several pages of reports before sliding one across to Dana. It was a grainy photo of Lucius Kane, taken at the docks. "This is their leader," Ethan said. "He doesn't come into town often, but when he does, something big usually follows." Dana stared at the photo, her chest tightening. Lucius looked older, more weathered, but the hard edge in his eyes was unmistakable. "Thanks," Dana said, tucking the report under her arm. "And deputy?" "Yeah. Keep your sister safe. I'll take care of the rest." That night, Dana sat in her motel room, poring over the reports Ethan had given her. Each page painted a picture of a well-oiled machine, a criminal network that operated with military precision. The deeper she read, the more connections she began to piece together. The Ironfang MC wasn't just a biker gang. They were part of something much larger, something that reached beyond Havenwood. Her phone buzzed again, and this time the message was text only. "You should have stayed out of it, Commander. Now you've made it personal." "Okay." Dana's lips curled into a grim smile as she set the phone down. "Good," she muttered to herself. "Let's keep it personal." The morning fog clung to the streets of Havenwood as Dana Whitlock made her way down Main Street, her thoughts preoccupied with what she'd uncovered. The Ironfang MC wasn't just a nuisance. It was the tip of a much larger network. Lucius Kane's reappearance wasn't just personal. It was the linchpin in a conspiracy that had roots far deeper than Havenwood's quiet coastal community. Her destination this time was Havenwood's town hall. If the Ironfang MC operated with impunity, someone in local government had to be enabling them. Mayor Philip Grant was the obvious candidate. As she pushed through the heavy oak doors, she felt the air shift, a mix of polished professionalism and quiet fear. "Can I help you?" a young receptionist asked, glancing up from her desk. "I need to speak with the mayor," Dana said, her tone firm but polite. The receptionist hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "He's in a meeting right now." "It won't take long," Dana interrupted, giving the woman a look that brooked no argument. The receptionist reluctantly picked up the phone, murmured something, and then nodded toward a set of double doors. "Go ahead." Philip Grant's office was a caricature of political success. Dark mahogany furniture, framed degrees on the wall, and photographs of Grant shaking hands with various state officials. The man himself, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with graying hair, stood behind his desk as Dana entered, a carefully constructed smile on his face. "Ms. Whitlock, isn't it?" he greeted, extending a hand. "Welcome to Havenwood. I hear you've been making quite an impression around town." Dana ignored the hand and took a seat without being asked. "Let's cut to the chase, Mayor. You've got a biker gang running roughshod over this town, and from what I can see, you're either turning a blind eye or actively helping them." The smile faltered, but Grant quickly recovered. "I assure you, I'm doing everything in my power to maintain law and order." Dana leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Save the political spin. I saw Ironfang MC's operation at the docks. The way they move, the resources they have, it's not something they could pull off without someone in power covering for them." "Is it you?" Grant's jaw tightened, and his hands gripped the edge of his desk. For a moment, Dana thought he might deny everything. but then his face softened into a mask of weary resignation. "You don't understand," he said, lowering his voice. "They came here months ago. At first, it was small, just a few bikers causing trouble. But then they started bringing money. They offered protection, investments, ways to make Havenwood grow. This town was struggling, Ms. Whitlock. People were losing their businesses, their homes. What was I supposed to do? Turn them away? Funny how their investments involve threats and extortion." Dana shot back. "Or are you getting a cut of that, too?" Grant's eyes flared with indignation. "I did what I had to do to protect this town. If you think that makes me a bad man, so be it. But if you push them too far, you'll be putting everyone in Havenwood in danger." "That's not your decision to make," Dana said coldly, standing up. "Your job is to protect the people, not sell them out." Before Grant could respond, Dana turned and walked out, her mind already working on the next piece of the puzzle. Later that night, Dana sat in her Jeep parked near the docks, watching the shadows move across the waterfront. The Ironfong MC was busy unloading crates from a cargo ship, their movements precise and calculated. She raised her binoculars again, her heart skipping a beat when she saw one of the crates being opened. Inside were rows of canisters, each marked with biohazard symbols. Dana's stomach tightened. This wasn't just about weapons. This was something far worse. Her phone buzzed, and she answered without taking her eyes off the scene. "Sophie?" "I found something," Sophie whispered on the other end. "Meet me at the diner in 20 minutes. Dana hesitated, torn between staying to gather more intel and following up on Sophie's lead. She decided Sophie's information might help her make sense of what she was seeing. The diner was nearly empty when Dana arrived, save for Sophie, who sat in a corner booth with a laptop open in front of her. Her usual friendly demeanor had been replaced by a tense focus. "What did you find?" Dana asked, sliding into the booth. Sophie turned the laptop around, showing a map with several red markers. "These are properties around Havenwood that have been bought up in the last 6 months. Most of them were purchased by a shell company called Blackfall Industries." And Blackfall Industries is a front," Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's tied to an international arms dealer named Marcus Vane." The name hit Dana like a punch to the gut. "Marcus Vane?" Sophie nodded. "You know him?" Dana's hands clenched into fists. "He's my ex-husband." Sophie stared at her, stunned. "You're kidding." "I wish I was," Dana said bitterly. "What else do you have?" Sophie pulled up another file. "There's more. The crates at the docks, they're not just carrying weapons. There are reports that they're transporting something called Project Ironstorm. It's biological." Dana sat back, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. Marcus wasn't just involved. He was orchestrating this entire operation. Before Dana could fully process the implications, the diner door opened, and a man in a leather jacket walked in. He didn't glance around, didn't acknowledge Sophie or Dana. He simply walked to the counter, ordered coffee, and sat down. But Dana's instinct screamed at her. She recognized the way he carried himself, the slight bulge under his jacket where a gun was concealed, the purposeful way he moved. This wasn't a local. She leaned towards Sophie, keeping her voice low. "We've been made. Do you have a back exit?" Sophie nodded, her face pale. "Through the kitchen." "Go," Dana said, sliding out of the booth. "I'll handle this." Sophie hesitated but obeyed, disappearing into the back. Dana stood, her hand resting on the knife concealed in her jacket. The man at the counter turned, his gaze meeting hers. His expression was neutral, but Dana saw the faintest flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You're not from around here," Dana said calmly, taking a step closer. "Neither are you," the man replied. Dana's lips twitched into a humorless smile. "Let me guess. Lucius sent you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached for something under his jacket. Dana moved before he could, her hand darting out to grab his wrist, slamming it against the counter. His gun clattered to the floor as she twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him down. "Tell Lucius I'm coming for him," she hissed. The man groaned but didn't answer. Dana released him with a shove, grabbing his gun and pocketing it as she walked out the front door. The war in Havenwood had just begun, and Dana intended to end it on her terms. The storm rolling over Havenwood mirrored the chaos in Dana Whitlock's mind. Rain lashed against her Jeep's windshield as she drove back to her motel, the events of the last 24 hours playing on repeat in her head. Marcus Vane, her ex-husband, wasn't just involved in the Ironfang MC's operations, he was running them. The man she'd once trusted was now orchestrating a global conspiracy, one that had brought weapons and possibly biological threats to her doorstep. As she parked in front of the motel, she noticed Sophie waiting for her under the awning, a hoodie pulled tightly around her face to shield her from the rain. Sophie's laptop was tucked under her arm, and her expression was a mixture of determination and fear. "Get inside," Dana called, motioning toward her room. The two women entered the cramped motel room, where Dana quickly locked the door and pulled the curtains shut. Sophie sat at the small desk, flipping open her laptop, while Dana began checking the gun she'd confiscated from the man at the diner. "They'll be looking for us now," Dana said without looking up. "Lucius doesn't let threats go unanswered, and Marcus, he's even worse." Sophie nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I know. That's why I've been digging deeper into Blackfall Industries and the Ironfang MC. The connections are bigger than we thought." Dana leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. "How much bigger?" Sophie pulled up a series of documents on her screen, gesturing for Dana to look. Blackfall Industries is tied to multiple shell companies. They've been buying up properties not just in Havenwood, but in small towns across the region, coastal hubs, isolated areas, places with minimal law enforcement presence. Dana frowned. "What are they doing with these properties?" "They're using them as distribution points," Sophie explained. "Arms, drugs, and now," she hesitated, her voice dropping, "potentially biological weapons. They're building a network, one that lets them move illegal shipments without drawing attention. Each town they infiltrate becomes part of the infrastructure." Dana stared at the screen, her mind racing. She recognized the strategy. It was the same tactic she'd seen during her time in the military, used by insurgent groups to establish dominance in hostile regions. But this wasn't a war zone. It was her home. "Do you have proof?" Dana asked. Sophie nodded. "Some. I pulled records from Blackfall's recent transactions and cross-referenced them with property purchases and shipping manifests. But there's one thing that ties it all together." "What's that?" Sophie clicked on a file labeled Project Ironstorm. A series of documents appeared on the screen, marked with blacked-out names and redacted sections. "This project was first mentioned in classified military reports about 2 years ago," Sophie said. "The files I found suggest it's a joint operation between private contractors and rogue officials. They're using these shipments to test a weaponized virus, something that can destabilize entire regions without needing conventional warfare." Dana felt the weight of the revelation settle on her. "And Marcus is running this?" Sophie shook her head. "Not entirely. He's a major player, but there's someone above him, an organization called Echelon. They're pulling the strings, using people like Marcus and Lucius to do the dirty work." Dana's mind reeled. She had suspected something larger, but this was worse than she imagined. A shadowy organization using small towns to experiment with weapons of mass destruction wasn't just a local threat. It was a global one. The rain had slowed by the time Dana and Sophie left the motel to regroup with Ethan Hayes, the deputy sheriff who had reluctantly agreed to help them. They met in the back room of a local auto shop, a location Dana had deemed relatively safe. Ethan's face was pale as Dana and Sophie laid out what they had uncovered. This is insane," Ethan said, shaking his head. "Biological weapons? Secret organizations? That's way over our heads." "That's why we're here," Dana replied firmly. "If we let this slide, Havenwood won't survive what's coming. And if it spreads to other towns, the damage will be catastrophic." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "You think we can take them on with just the 3 of us? They've got resources, manpower. Hell, half the town's scared to even look at them wrong." "Who said it's just the 3 of us?" Dana said, a faint smile crossing her face. Sophie looked up, surprised. "You've got backup?" Dana nodded. "There's a group I've worked with before, the Iron Wolves. They're a biker club, but these aren't your average thugs. They're former military, special forces, and they don't take kindly to people like Lucius running roughshod over small towns. I called them earlier today. They'll be here by morning. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You trust them? With my life, Dana said simply. True to Dana's word, the Iron Wolves arrived at dawn. Their leader, Stone, was a towering man with a grizzled beard and a scar running across his left cheek. He greeted Dana with a firm handshake and a knowing look. Heard you've been stirring the pot, Stone said with a grin. Someone's got to, Dana replied. This town needs help, and we've got a bigger problem on our hands than just a gang. Stone nodded, his expression turning serious. We've been tracking rumors about Blackfall Industries for months. They've got their claws in more places than you'd believe. You've got proof? Dana gestured toward Sophie, who handed Stone a flash drive. It's all there. Property records, shipment manifests, mentions of Project Ironstorm. They're using these towns to move their product, and Havenwood is just one of many. Stone pocketed the drive. Good. My guys will start setting up a perimeter around the town. If Lucius or Marcus try to make a move, we'll know about it. As the Iron Wolves began coordinating their efforts, Dana pulled Stone aside. There's something else, she said. Marcus Vane is involved in this. He's running a large part of the operation, and he's using Lucius as a pawn. Stone's eyes narrowed. Marcus Vane, the arms dealer? Yeah, Dana said, her voice cold. And he's not just moving weapons anymore. He's playing with something much worse. By nightfall, the plan was in motion. The Iron Wolves had set up surveillance around the docks, while Sophie monitored communications from a makeshift command center in the auto shop. Ethan, still nervous but determined, had managed to quietly recruit a few other locals who were tired of living in fear. As Dana stood on a rooftop overlooking the docks, she felt a familiar sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she wasn't just reacting. She was taking the fight to the enemy. Through her binoculars, she watched as Lucius and his men unloaded another shipment. This time, they were joined by several men in suits. Marcus's people, no doubt. Dana's earpiece crackled to life as Sophie's voice came through. They've stepped up security, Sophie said. I'm counting at least a dozen armed guards around the perimeter and 2 more near the entrance. Good, Dana replied. Let them think they're in control. As she prepared for what was to come, Dana felt a grim determination settle over her. This wasn't just about Havenwood anymore. It was about stopping a shadow network that thought it could operate without consequence. And if they wanted a fight, she would make sure they got one. The air in Havenwood carried an electric tension, the kind that signaled a storm, not from the skies, but from the imminent clash brewing in the shadows. Dana Whitlock crouched on a rooftop near the docks, her sharp eyes scanning the movements below. The Ironfang MC, led by Lucius Kane, had fortified their position. Guard patrols moved in tight, deliberate patterns, covering key entry points to the sprawling warehouse that had become their stronghold. Dana adjusted her earpiece as Sophie's voice crackled through. They've doubled their security tonight, Sophie reported from the makeshift command center in the auto shop. 6 more guards arrived an hour ago. Automatic rifles, body armor. These aren't just bikers, they've brought in mercenaries. Dana frowned. That means Marcus is close. He wouldn't escalate like this unless he was about to show up personally. Stone, leader of the Iron Wolves, chimed in over the encrypted channel. We're in position. My team's covering the north entrance and the harbor road. When you're ready to move, give the signal. Dana nodded, even though no one could see her. Hold for now. I want to draw out Lucius first. Inside the warehouse, Lucius Kane paced like a caged animal. He barked orders at his men, demanding tighter security around the incoming shipment. The crates marked with biohazard symbols had been moved to a secure room in the back, and Lucius had doubled the number of guards stationed there. Jake, his right-hand man, approached cautiously. Boss, the men are on edge. That woman, the one from the diner, she's still out there. Some of the guys think she's ex-military. Lucius stopped pacing, his scarred face twisting into a scowl. Of course, she's military, he snapped. Dana Whitlock doesn't scare easily, and that makes her dangerous. But she's also predictable. Jake frowned. What do you mean? She'll come here, Lucius said confidently. She always does. She thinks she can take us down like some kind of vigilante. Let her come. We'll be ready. But despite his bravado, Lucius couldn't shake the unease creeping up his spine. Dana wasn't just a ghost from his past. She was a reminder of everything he'd lost. Dana watched from her rooftop vantage point as a sleek black SUV pulled up outside the warehouse. Her breath caught as the passenger door opened and Marcus Vane stepped out. Even after years apart, she recognized him instantly. His tailored suit, immaculate even in the rough surroundings, was a stark contrast to the bikers flanking him. His silver hair caught the faint glow of the overhead lights, and his expression was as calculating as ever. "He's here," Dana whispered into her earpiece. Sophie's voice tightened. "Marcus, are you sure?" "It's him," Dana confirmed. "No doubt about it." Marcus spoke briefly with Lucius, his calm demeanor standing in sharp contrast to the tension radiating from the Iron Fang leader. Dana adjusted her binoculars, studying their body language. Lucius looked agitated, gesturing wildly as he spoke, while Marcus remained still, watching him with cold detachment. "What's your read on this?" Stone asked over the channel. "Lucius thinks he's still in charge, but Marcus is running the show," Dana replied. "He's just letting Lucius play the part." "Typical," Stone muttered. "What's the play?" Dana smirked. "I'm going to rattle their cage." Minutes later, a flash of light erupted near the perimeter fence, followed by a deafening boom. Lucius and Marcus turned toward the sound as smoke began billowing into the night sky. "What the hell was that?" Lucius barked, spinning toward Jake. "We've got a breach," one of the guards shouted, running toward the commotion. Lucius cursed under his breath. "Get the men into position. Secure the shipment." As his men scrambled to respond, Dana moved like a shadow, slipping through the chaos she had orchestrated. She had rigged an old generator near the fence with a small charge, creating the perfect distraction. Now, with their attention divided, she maneuvered closer to the warehouse. Her earpiece crackled as Sophie updated her. "They've sent most of their guards to the east side. The back entrance is wide open." "On it," Dana replied, her voice steady. Inside the warehouse, Marcus stood calmly in the middle of the chaos, his eyes tracking every movement. He was no stranger to disruptions, and he knew better than to let panic take hold. "You're too reactive," he said to Lucius, his tone almost mocking. "This is exactly what she wants. While you're running around putting out fires, she's already inside." Lucius glared at him. "If you're so smart, why don't you tell me where she is?" Marcus smirked. "She's not hunting your men, Lucius. She's hunting you." Before Lucius could respond, a guard ran in, breathless. "Boss, we've got movement near the storage area." Lucius grabbed a rifle and marched toward the back of the warehouse, rage simmering just below the surface. Marcus followed at a more measured pace, his expression unreadable. Dana crouched behind a stack of crates, her knife in hand. The guards had swept past her moments earlier, oblivious to her presence. She had studied their patrol patterns for hours, and now she was inside, just a few steps away from the biohazard-marked crates. She pulled out her phone, snapping photos of the shipment. If they were going to take this operation down, they needed evidence, something undeniable. Her earpiece buzzed. "Dana," Sophie said urgently, "Lucius and Marcus are heading your way." Dana slipped into the shadows, positioning herself behind a large pillar. She steadied her breathing as the sound of boots echoed through the cavernous space. Lucius entered first, his rifle sweeping the room. "I know you're here, Whitlock," he shouted. "Come out and face me." Dana didn't move. She watched as Marcus followed, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "You're wasting your breath," Marcus said. "She's smarter than that." Lucius ignored him, his voice rising. "You think you can take me down? You think Havenwood will fight back once you're gone? This town belongs to me." From the shadows, Dana spoke, her voice cold and calm. "Havenwood doesn't belong to you, Lucius. It belongs to the people you've terrorized." Lucius spun toward her voice, firing a shot into the darkness. It missed by a wide margin, the sound reverberating through the warehouse. "You think you're a hero?" Lucius sneered. "You abandoned me, left me to die." Dana stepped into the dim light, her knife glinting. "You made your choices, Lucius. Don't blame me for the man you became." Before Lucius could fire again, Dana moved. She closed the distance between them in seconds, knocking the rifle from his hands with a brutal strike. He swung at her, but she ducked, driving her knee into his gut. As Lucius fell to the ground, gasping for air, Marcus watched from the sidelines, his expression calm but calculating. "This isn't over," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the room. "Not by a long shot." Dana turned to face him, her knife still in hand. "You're right. It's just getting started." Marcus smirked, then retreated into the shadows, leaving Lucius behind. Dana let him go for now. The battle in Havenwood was far from over, but tonight, Dana had sent a message. The Ironfang MC wasn't untouchable, and neither was Marcus Vane. The aftermath of the warehouse skirmish hung heavy in the air as Dana Whitlock regrouped with the Iron Wolves and Sophie at the auto shop. Rain drummed against the corrugated roof, while the low hum of conversation filled the room. Stone stood at the center of the group, his rugged features etched with determination as he studied the tactical map spread out on the table. "You rattled the hornet's nest," Stone said, glancing at Dana. "Lucius is furious, and Marcus knows we're onto him." "That's the point," Dana replied, crossing her arms. "Let them make mistakes. Desperation makes people sloppy." Sophie sat nearby, her laptop open as she sifted through the photos Dana had taken of the biohazard-marked crates. "These confirm everything we suspected," she said, her voice tense. "The symbols match military-grade containment protocols. Whatever's in those crates isn't just dangerous, it's illegal." "Did you get anything on Marcus?" Stone asked. Dana nodded grimly. "He was there. He didn't engage, but he saw me. He's pulling the strings, but Lucius is too volatile to keep a low profile. We can use that." Sophie chimed in, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I've intercepted some of their communications. Lucius is mobilizing his men, doubling down on security at the docks. They're planning to move the shipment tomorrow night." Dana leaned over the map. "If they move it, we lose our chance to shut this down. We need to strike before then." Stone tapped the map near the docks. "They've got the numbers and firepower to hold us off. If we hit them head-on, we're walking into a slaughter." "We're not hitting them head-on," Dana said, her voice firm. "We're going to divide and conquer." As the rain continued to fall, Dana and Stone outlined their plan. The Iron Wolves would stage a series of distractions around Havenwood, drawing Lucius's men away from the docks. Sophie would use her tech skills to sabotage their communications, ensuring chaos within their ranks. Dana, along with a small team, would infiltrate the warehouse and secure the shipment. It was a risky plan, but time wasn't on their side. "You sure about this?" Stone asked as the team prepared to move out. "I'm sure," Dana replied, strapping a tactical knife to her belt. "This ends tonight." Across town, Lucius paced inside a dimly lit room at one of the Ironfang MC's safe houses. His anger boiled over as he barked orders at his lieutenants. "Double the guards at the docks," he snapped. "I don't care if you have to bring in every man we've got. I want her dead before she gets near that shipment again." One of his men hesitated. "Boss, what about Marcus? He's not going to like us pulling resources without his approval." Lucius slammed his fist on the table, silencing the room. "I don't care what Marcus likes. This is my town, and I'm not letting some ex-soldier ruin everything we've built." The men exchanged uneasy glances but nodded, filing out to carry out his orders. As Lucius leaned back in his chair, trying to calm the storm in his mind, his phone buzzed. He answered without checking the caller ID. "You're losing control," Marcus's voice came through, icy and precise. Lucius gritted his teeth. "I've got it under control." "Do you?" Marcus replied. "Because from where I'm standing, Whitlock is running circles around you." "Then come down here and handle it yourself," Lucius snapped. Marcus chuckled. "I don't dirty my hands for amateurs. Do your job, Lucius, or someone else will." The line went dead, leaving Lucius seething. Meanwhile, the Iron Wolves executed their distractions with precision. Motorcycle engines roared through Havenwood as small skirmishes broke out at strategic points, forcing Lucius's men to spread themselves thin. Fires erupted at supply depots, and key vehicles were disabled, leaving the Ironfang MC scrambling to regain control. Dana and Sophie coordinated the chaos from a concealed location near the docks. "How's it looking?" Dana asked over the radio. Sophie's voice crackled through. They're taking the bait. Their men are spread out, and their response times are slower. Communications are breaking down. You've got an opening. Dana motioned to her small team, 2 Iron Wolves and Ethan Hayes, the deputy sheriff. Move in, she ordered. The group slipped through the shadows, navigating the rain-slicked terrain with practiced ease. The warehouse loomed ahead, its security lights casting eerie reflections on the puddles below. Dana signaled for the team to hold as she scoped out the perimeter. There are 3 guards at the entrance, she whispered. We take them out quietly. The Iron Wolves nodded, their movements silent as they fanned out. Within moments, the guards were subdued, their weapons confiscated. Inside the warehouse, the sound of machinery echoed through the cavernous space. Dana led the group through the maze of crates, her senses on high alert. There, Ethan whispered, pointing to a stack of biohazard-marked crates in the center of the room. Dana approached cautiously, her heart pounding. She reached for one of the crates, prying it open with a crowbar. Inside were rows of canisters, each labeled with complex scientific codes and warnings. This is it, Dana said, her voice grim. We need to secure these and get them out of here. Before they could act, the sound of footsteps approached from the far side of the warehouse. Dana signaled for the team to hide, her knife at the ready. Lucius appeared, flanked by 2 armed guards. His expression was twisted with rage as he scanned the room. I know you're here, Whitlock, he bellowed. Come out and face me. Dana stepped into the open, her knife glinting under the dim light. Looking for me? She said, her voice calm. Lucius grinned, his scarred face contorting. I knew you couldn't resist. Let's finish this. The 2 guards raised their weapons, but before they could fire, the Iron Wolves emerged from the shadows, taking them down in a flurry of precise movements. Lucius charged at Dana, swinging wildly with a knife of his own. She sidestepped his attack, landing a swift kick to his ribs. He stumbled, but recovered quickly, lunging again. The fight was brutal, their blades clashing as the sounds of rain and distant gunfire filled the air. Dana's training gave her the edge, but Lucius fought with the desperation of a man with everything to lose. You ruined me, Lucius roared as he swung at her. Everything I had, you took away. I didn't ruin you, Dana shot back, dodging his strike. You did that yourself. With a final, calculated move, Dana disarmed him, sending his knife skittering across the floor. She pinned him against a stack of crates, her own blade pressed to his throat. It's over, she said coldly. Lucius laughed bitterly. You think this ends with me? Marcus will burn this town to the ground before he lets you win. Dana's expression didn't waver. Let him try. As sirens wailed in the distance, backup called in by Sophie, the rest of Lucius's men fled, leaving the warehouse in disarray. Dana and the team secured the biohazard crates, ensuring they would be handed over to trusted federal agents, far from Marcus's reach. But as Dana stood outside the warehouse, rain dripping from her face, she knew the fight was far from over. Marcus Vane wouldn't back down, and neither would she. This was only the beginning. The rain finally subsided as dawn broke over Havenwood, leaving the streets damp and eerily quiet. The storm had passed, but Dana Whitlock knew it was only a temporary reprieve. She stood outside the auto shop, watching the Iron Wolves load the confiscated biohazard crates into an unmarked truck. The crates were headed to a secure federal facility far from Marcus Vane's reach, but that was just one battle in a much larger war. Stone approached her, his imposing figure casting a long shadow in the early morning light. The shipment's secure, but this isn't over, he said grimly. Dana nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Marcus won't take this lying down. He'll escalate, and when he does, we'll need to be ready. Sophie stepped out of the shop, her laptop in hand and dark circles under her eyes. I intercepted some new chatter, she said, her voice tight. Marcus is furious, and he's mobilizing his people. He's not just coming after Havenwood, he's bringing reinforcements. Stone frowned. What kind of reinforcements? Sophie tapped on her laptop, pulling up surveillance photos of heavily armed men arriving at a private airstrip just outside town. Marcus called in a team of mercenaries. They're not just hired muscle, they're ex-military, and they're well-funded. Dana's jaw tightened. He's upping the stakes. He's not just trying to recover the shipment. He's making an example out of Havenwood. Meanwhile, at a secluded mansion on the outskirts of Havenwood, Marcus Vane sat in his office, reviewing a dossier on Dana Whitlock. The room was lavishly furnished, but the cold steel in Marcus's demeanor contrasted sharply with the opulence around him. A man in tactical gear entered, saluting briefly. "We've mobilized the team. They'll be in position by nightfall." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his piercing blue eyes scanning the photos of Dana and her allies. "Good," he said, his voice smooth but menacing. "Whitlock has been a thorn in my side for far too long. This ends now." "What about Lucius?" the man asked. Marcus's expression darkened. "Lucius is a liability. His ego and incompetence brought us to this point. Cut him loose." The mercenary hesitated. "You want us to?" "Make it look clean," Marcus interrupted, his tone final. "I don't care how you do it, just make sure it sends a message." The mercenary nodded and left the room, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He picked up a photograph of himself and Dana from years ago, back when their lives were intertwined by something other than conflict. His thumb brushed over the image before he placed it face down on the desk. "You should have stayed out of this, Dana," he murmured. "Now, you'll leave me no choice." Back at the auto shop, Dana and her team were finalizing their plans for the inevitable confrontation. "We're outnumbered and outgunned," Stone said, pointing to the map of Havenwood on the table. "Marcus's people will have the advantage in firepower and tactical training. We need to even the odds." Dana nodded, her mind racing. "We don't fight them head-on. We make Havenwood the battlefield. We know this town better than they do, and that gives us an edge." Ethan, the deputy, spoke up. "The locals are scared, but they're not cowards. If we give them a reason to stand up, they'll fight for their town." "That's exactly what Marcus isn't expecting," Dana said, a small smile forming. "He thinks Havenwood is weak, but he doesn't understand what people are capable of when they've got something worth protecting." Sophie tapped her laptop. "I can disable their drones and scramble their communications, but it won't hold them for long. We'll need to act fast once the chaos starts." Stone crossed his arms. "And if this goes sideways?" Dana met his gaze, her voice steady. "It won't." As the day wore on, Havenwood's residents began to stir. Dana, Stone, and Ethan visited local businesses, quietly rallying support. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit community. Marcus Vane's men were coming, and this time, it wasn't just about the docks. At the hardware store, the owner handed over a box of tools and supplies. "I've seen enough of those bikers running this town into the ground," he said. "Count me in." The mechanic at the auto shop offered spare parts and equipment. The owner of the diner, who had witnessed Dana's confrontation with Lucius, promised to keep watch and provide food for the team. By nightfall, Havenwood was no longer just a target. It was a fortress. When Marcus's mercenaries arrived, they found a town that was eerily quiet. Their convoy of black SUVs rolled through the main street, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The lead vehicle stopped, and the mercenaries disembarked, their movements precise and deliberate. One of the men scanned the area with a thermal scope. "No movement," he reported. "It's too quiet." "Stay sharp," their leader ordered. "Whitlock's here somewhere." Unbeknownst to them, Dana and her team were already in position, watching from the rooftops and alleyways. Sophie's voice came through the earpiece. "They've set up a command post in the old courthouse," she said. "That'll be their hub. If we take it out, we'll cripple their operation." Dana adjusted her grip on the rifle slung over her shoulder. "Stone, take your team to the north side and draw their attention. Ethan, secure the perimeter. Sophie, keep scrambling their comms. I'll handle the command post." "Got it," Stone replied. "See you on the other side." As Stone and the Iron Wolves began their assault, chaos erupted across Havenwood. Explosions rang out as makeshift barricades ignited, cutting off key roads. The mercenaries scrambled to respond, their carefully laid plans unraveling in the confusion. Dana moved through the chaos like a shadow, her movements precise and deliberate. She reached the courthouse and slipped inside, using the distraction to her advantage. The command post was on the second floor, guarded by two mercenaries. Dana took them out silently, her knife flashing in the dim light. Inside the room, computers and monitors displayed live feeds of Havenwood, along with tactical maps marked with their positions. Dana quickly began planting charges on the equipment, ensuring the command post would be destroyed. As she worked, she heard footsteps approaching. She spun around just as the door opened, revealing Marcus Vane himself. For a moment, neither of them moved, the weight of their shared history filling the room. "You always did have a knack for chaos," Marcus said, his voice calm but laced with venom. "And you always did underestimate me," Dana replied. Marcus smirked, drawing a pistol. "It doesn't have to end like this, Dana. Walk away, and I'll let Havenwood go. You can't win this fight." Dana stared him down, her hand hovering over the detonator in her pocket. "You've already lost, Marcus. You just don't know it yet." Before Marcus could respond, Dana pressed the detonator, and the charges went off. The room erupted in fire and smoke, forcing Marcus to retreat as Dana slipped out through a side window. The night was far from over, but the tide had turned. The command post was gone, and Marcus's men were in disarray. Havenwood wasn't just fighting back, it was winning. As Dana regrouped with her team, she allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. Marcus had underestimated her before, but this time, she intended to make sure he never made that mistake again. The war for Havenwood was nearing its climax, and Dana was ready for whatever came next. The air in Havenwood buzzed with tension as the fires from the night's chaos began to die down. The old courthouse, now reduced to smoldering rubble, stood as a testament to Dana Whitlock's bold strike against Marcus Vane's forces. Yet the battle was far from over. Marcus's mercenaries, though disoriented, were regrouping in the town square, using the dim light of dawn to consolidate their forces. Dana crouched in the alley behind the hardware store, peering through binoculars at the mercenaries' makeshift command zone. Sophie's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Marcus isn't retreating," Sophie said, her tone grim. "He's pulling more men into the square. He's digging in." Dana frowned. "He wants to make this personal. If we let him solidify his position, we'll lose the upper hand." Stone's voice cut into the conversation. "We can't wait for them to come to us. If we strike now, we might have a shot at breaking them for good." Dana lowered her binoculars, her mind racing. "We can't fight them head-on. They've got firepower and numbers, and the town's still in danger. We need to dismantle them piece by piece." Marcus Vane stood at the center of the town square, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the chaos around him. His calm, calculating demeanor remained intact, but frustration simmered beneath the surface. "Status?" he asked one of his lieutenants, a grizzled mercenary named Yerrick. "The courthouse is gone," Yerrick reported. "We've lost most of our comms and half the surveillance equipment. The men are spooked, but they're holding." Marcus glanced at the burning courthouse, his jaw tightening. "Whitlock," he muttered under his breath. Yerrick hesitated. "If I may, sir, this isn't just about Havenwood anymore. Pulling out now would save." Marcus's sharp glare silenced him. "We don't pull out," he said coldly. "This town is a warning to anyone who thinks they can cross me. If Whitlock wants a war, we'll give her one." Back at the auto shop, the Iron Wolves gathered around a hastily constructed battle map. Dana, Stone, Sophie, and Ethan worked quickly, coordinating their next move. "We can't just keep throwing distractions at them," Ethan said. "Eventually, they're going to push back, and we don't have the firepower to stop them." "We don't need firepower," Dana replied. "We need precision. Marcus has overplayed his hand. He's exposed now, and that's our opportunity." Sophie tapped her laptop, bringing up a map of the square. "They've set up a supply cache near the old library. If we take it out, we'll cripple their ability to regroup." Stone grinned. "We've got enough C4 left for that. My guys can handle it." Dana nodded but held up a hand. "We need more than that. Marcus is trying to draw me out. I'll give him what he wants." Ethan looked at her, alarmed. "You're going to confront him? Alone?" Dana's lips tightened. "Not alone. I'll draw his attention while the wolves hit their supply lines. Sophie, I need you to keep scrambling their communications. Ethan, get the townspeople ready to move. Barricades, traps, anything they can manage. If this is going to be our stand, we use every advantage." As the sun crept higher, Marcus's men solidified their hold on the square. Mercenaries patrolled the area with military precision, their eyes scanning every shadow for signs of movement. From the roof of a nearby building, Dana watched the scene unfold, her sniper rifle resting on the ledge. Through her scope, she tracked Marcus as he barked orders, his every gesture radiating confidence. "Stone," she whispered into her earpiece. "Are you in position?" "Locked and loaded," came Stone's reply. "On your signal." Dana steadied her breathing, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. "Sophie, cut their comms." "Done," Sophie said. The mercenaries' radios crackled, then went silent. Confusion rippled through their ranks as Dana fired her first shot, taking down one of the guards at the edge of the square. "Contact!" one of the mercenaries shouted, his voice echoing through the square. Chaos erupted as Stone's team hit the supply cache, detonating the C4. The explosion sent a shockwave through the town, scattering Marcus's forces. Dana used the distraction to reposition, taking out another guard before retreating into the shadows. Marcus stood in the center of the square, his calm demeanor finally cracking. "Yerrick, get those lines back up," he shouted. "We're blind, sir." Yerrick replied, struggling to rally the disoriented men. Marcus clenched his fists, his eyes scanning the rooftops. "Whitlock," he hissed. As the battle raged, Ethan led a group of townspeople in fortifying key positions. Armed with makeshift weapons and raw determination, they created barricades and set traps in the narrow streets leading to the square. "You're doing great," Ethan said, patting the shoulder of a teenage boy who had volunteered to help. "Keep it up." The boy nodded, his face pale but resolute. Dana moved through the alleys, her every step calculated. She could feel Marcus's presence like a weight pressing down on her. She knew this confrontation had been inevitable from the start. When she emerged into the square, Marcus was waiting for her, his pistol drawn. "Finally," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long, Dana. And you've been a parasite for far too long," she shot back, her knife glinting in the light. The two of them circled each other, the tension crackling like static. "You could have had everything," Marcus said, his voice low. "We could have built something together, but you chose to play the hero." Dana's eyes narrowed. "And you chose to destroy lives for profit. That's not building. It's poisoning." Marcus smirked, still so self-righteous. "Tell me, Dana, do you really think you can win this? Even if you take me down, Echelon won't stop. You're fighting a war you can't win." "I don't need to win the war," Dana said, her voice cold. "I just need to stop you." Marcus raised his pistol, but before he could fire, Dana moved. She closed the distance in an instant, her knife slashing across his forearm. The gun clattered to the ground as Marcus stumbled back, clutching his bleeding arm. The fight that followed was brutal. Marcus was strong, his strikes fueled by anger and desperation, but Dana's training and precision gave her the edge. She dodged his attacks, landing calculated blows that weakened him with every step. Finally, Marcus fell to his knees, gasping for air. Dana stood over him, her knife poised. "It's over," she said. Marcus laughed, blood staining his teeth. "You think this ends with me? Echelon will bury you." "Let them try," Dana replied, her voice like steel. Before she could deliver the final blow, Sophie's voice came through her earpiece. "Dana, reinforcements are inbound. You need to move now." Dana hesitated, then stepped back, leaving Marcus alive. "This isn't mercy," she said. "It's justice. You'll face the consequences for what you've done." As Marcus slumped to the ground, defeated, Dana disappeared into the chaos, her mission far from over, but her resolve stronger than ever. The fight for Havenwood was turning in her favor, but the storm of Echelon loomed on the horizon. The battle in Havenwood had left the town scarred but defiant. Fires smoldered in the wreckage of the courthouse, while makeshift barricades still lined the streets. The townspeople, battered but emboldened, worked together to clean up the debris and rebuild what the Ironfang MC and Marcus's mercenaries had tried to destroy. Dana Whitlock stood at the edge of the town square, watching as the Iron Wolves regrouped and tended to their injured. Marcus Vane had been captured but remained defiant, his cryptic warnings about Echelon echoing in Dana's mind. Stone approached her, his face grim but resolute. We bought Havenwood some time, but this fight's not over. You know that, right? Dana nodded. Echelon won't let this go. Marcus was just a piece of their machine. If we don't hit them now, they'll come back stronger. Sophie joined them, clutching her laptop. I managed to pull data off Marcus's personal tablet before the mercenaries scattered. It's a mess of encrypted files, but I found something that might help. What is it? Dana asked. Sophie pulled up a satellite image on her screen, zooming in on a remote compound deep in the forested hills outside Havenwood. This is one of Echelon's operational hubs. It's heavily fortified, but if we hit it, we might get the leverage we need to shut them down for good. Stone folded his arms. Hitting a fortified base is a suicide mission. We don't have a choice, Dana said. Echelon doesn't just want Havenwood. They're using small towns like this to build a network. If we let them regroup, they'll crush every community in their path. Later that evening, the Iron Wolves and Havenwood's makeshift militia gathered in the auto shop to plan their assault. The room buzzed with nervous energy as Sophie briefed the group on what little she'd been able to glean about the compound. It's a black site, Sophie explained, pointing to the satellite image. No official records, no public access. Echelon uses places like this to coordinate their operations and store sensitive intel. If we can breach it and extract their files, we'll have proof of what they've been doing, not just here, but across the country. Ethan, the deputy, looked skeptical. And what happens if we don't make it out? They'll bury everything, and we'll just be another set of names on a list. Dana's voice cut through the room like a blade. That's a risk I'm willing to take. We've seen what Echelon is capable of. If we don't stop them now, there won't be a Havenwood left to save. Stone placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. We've got the training, the numbers, and the motivation. We're not walking into this blind. Ethan sighed but nodded. All right, I'm in. As midnight approached, the team moved out, splitting into two groups. Stone and the Iron Wolves would create a diversion, drawing Echelon's attention to the front gate, while Dana, Sophie, and a small strike team infiltrated the compound from the east. The forest surrounding the black site was dense, the trees casting long shadows under the moonlight. Dana led her team with practiced precision, her senses heightened by the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Sophie's voice crackled through Dana's earpiece. They've got motion sensors along the perimeter. Give me a second to disable them. Make it quick, Dana whispered. Sophie typed furiously on her laptop, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. And done. You're clear. The team moved forward, slipping through the fence and into the compound's outer yard. Dana held up a hand, signaling for them to stop as a guard patrolled past. With a swift motion, she neutralized him, dragging his unconscious body into the shadows. Go, she whispered, leading the team toward the main building. Inside the compound, the atmosphere was cold and sterile. The walls were lined with monitors displaying surveillance feeds and tactical maps, while rows of computers hummed quietly. Dana and her team navigated the halls carefully, avoiding detection as they made their way to the control room. Sophie plugged her laptop into the central server, her fingers flying across the keyboard. This is it, Sophie said, her voice hushed but urgent. These files are massive. They've got records of everything, payoffs to local officials, smuggling routes, even internal memos about Project Ironstorm. Dana scanned the room, her weapon at the ready. How long do you need? 5 minutes, Sophie replied. You've got 3, Dana said. As Sophie worked, Dana's earpiece crackled with Stone's voice. We've got company. Reinforcements just showed up, heavily armed. They're cutting through the forest. Dana cursed under her breath. Buy us time, Stone. We're almost done. Outside, Stone and the Iron Wolves engaged Echelon's reinforcements in a brutal firefight. Bullets tore through the night as the forest became a war zone. Stone barked orders, his voice steady despite the chaos. Hold the line, he shouted. Don't let them push through. The wolves fought with everything they had, using the terrain to their advantage. Explosions lit up the sky as improvised charges took out vehicles and scattered enemy squads. Back inside the compound, Sophie's download hit 90%. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she watched the progress bar inch forward. We're running out of time, Dana said, her eyes darting to the hallway. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Echelon's guards were closing in. The progress bar finally hit 100%, and Sophie yanked the drive from the computer. Got it. Let's move, Dana ordered. The team retraced their steps, but as they reached the outer yard, they were ambushed. Echelon guards opened fire, forcing Dana and her team to take cover behind a stack of crates. Stay low, Dana shouted, returning fire. The firefight was intense, the air filled with the deafening sound of gunfire and shouted orders. Dana moved with lethal precision, taking out guards one by one. Sophie stayed behind cover, clutching the drive like it was her lifeline. We can't stay here, she shouted. Dana spotted an opening. Follow me. She led the team through a side gate, weaving through the shadows until they reached the forest. The sound of gunfire grew fainter as they put distance between themselves and the compound. By the time they regrouped with Stone and the Iron Wolves, the sun was beginning to rise. The team was battered and exhausted, but they had succeeded. Sophie held up the drive triumphantly. We've got everything. Stone nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and determination. Then we've got what we need to bring Echelon down. Dana looked at her team, her resolve stronger than ever. This is just the beginning. They wanted a war, and now they've got one. Let's finish this. As the first light of day bathed Havenwood in a golden glow, Dana knew they were one step closer to exposing the truth and dismantling Echelon's empire, no matter the cost. The first rays of dawn lit up Havenwood, painting the town in hues of gold and crimson. The people of Havenwood were awake, their tired faces determined as they prepared for what was to come. The battle at the compound had bought Dana and her team critical time, but they knew Echelon's retaliation would come swiftly and with overwhelming force. Dana Whitlock stood in the makeshift command center at the auto shop, staring at the stolen data Sophie had decrypted overnight. The files were damning, a sprawling web of corruption, payoffs, illegal arms deals, and human trafficking routes that stretched across the country. The documents also included clear evidence tying Marcus Vane and the Ironfang MC to Project Ironstorm, a covert operation spearheaded by Echelon to infiltrate small towns and systematically control them. But it wasn't just about small towns. The files revealed something far more sinister. Echelon was planning to roll out Ironstorm on a national scale, turning their network of fear and control into a shadow government. This isn't just about Havenwood, Dana said, her voice low and steady. This is about stopping them everywhere. Stone, standing beside her, crossed his arms. So what's the play? We can't hold them off forever, and now that they know we have their files, they'll stop at nothing to get them back. Sophie, seated at her laptop, turned the screen toward the group. We go public. We release everything, names, operations, documents. We send it to every journalist, every law enforcement agency, every whistleblower forum out there. Once the truth is out, Echelon can't hide anymore. And what happens to us? Ethan asked, his expression uneasy. We keep fighting, Dana said firmly. We've got one chance to cripple them before they silence us. If we lose here, it's over. Across town, Marcus Vane sat in the back of an armored SUV, flanked by two heavily armed mercenaries. Though battered from his encounter with Dana, he exuded an air of quiet menace as he stared out the window at the town he had intended to dominate. They've got the files, Marcus said, addressing a man on the other end of a secure line. If they release them, it'll burn everything we've built. The voice on the line was cold and authoritative. Then make sure they don't release them. Send the full force of our operatives. No survivors, Marcus. This is your last chance to prove your loyalty. Marcus's jaw tightened as he ended the call. He glanced at the mercenaries beside him. Get the teams ready. This ends today. The morning passed in tense preparation. Dana and the Iron Wolves coordinated the town's defenses, turning Havenwood into a fortress. Barricades were reinforced, traps were set, and townspeople were armed with whatever they could find. Tools, hunting rifles, even improvised Molotov cocktails. Sophie worked tirelessly at her laptop, finalizing the upload of the stolen files to secure servers. Once I hit send, it's out there, she said. They won't be able to stop it. Dana placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder. You've done enough, Sophie. When this starts, you find a safe place to hide. Sophie shook her head. No way. If I'm going down fighting with you. Dana smiled faintly. I wouldn't expect anything less. By late afternoon, the first wave of Echelon's forces arrived. Black SUVs and armored vehicles rolled into Havenwood, their tires crunching against the gravel streets. Marcus's mercenaries disembarked with military precision, taking up positions around the town square. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning for movement. Marcus himself stood at the center of the square, his cold gaze fixed on the barricades ahead. He raised a megaphone and addressed the defenders. Dana Whitlock, he called out, his voice echoing through the town. You've made your point. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Surrender now, and I'll spare the town. Resist, and I'll burn Havenwood to the ground. Dana's voice rang out from a rooftop. You've already lost, Marcus. The files are gone. The world knows who you are and what you've done. You don't have a network to protect anymore, just your own survival. Marcus smirked, though his eyes betrayed his growing frustration. We'll see about that. He raised his hand, signaling his men to attack. The battle for Havenwood erupted with explosive violence. Echelon's mercenaries advanced, their movements swift and coordinated. The townspeople, led by Dana, Stone, and the Iron Wolves, fought back with everything they had. Traps detonated as mercenaries pushed through narrow streets, taking out entire squads. Snipers from the Iron Wolves picked off key targets, slowing Echelon's advance. Townspeople hurled Molotov cocktails, creating walls of fire that forced the attackers to retreat. Dana moved through the chaos like a ghost, her rifle picking off enemies with surgical precision. She worked in tandem with Stone, whose booming voice rallied the defenders whenever they began to falter. Hold the line, Stone shouted, firing a burst from his assault rifle. Ethan led a group of townspeople in a counterattack, using their knowledge of Havenwood's backstreets to flank Echelon's forces. At the auto shop, Sophie watched the progress of the upload, the bar inching toward completion. She glanced nervously at the door, the sound of gunfire growing louder. Hurry up, she muttered to the screen. Suddenly, the door burst open, and two mercenaries stormed in. Sophie grabbed a wrench from the table and swung it with all her strength, knocking one of them to the ground. Before the second could react, Dana appeared, her knife flashing as she dispatched him with brutal efficiency. You okay? Dana asked, pulling Sophie to her feet. Yeah, Sophie said, panting. The files are almost up. Just buy me a little more time. In the town square, Marcus watched his forces falter, his smirk replaced by a scowl. He grabbed a radio and barked orders. Send in the second wave. Finish this now. But as the reinforcements moved in, an explosion rocked the street behind them. A convoy of motorcycles roared into view. The Iron Wolves' backup, a coalition of bikers from neighboring towns who had heard of Havenwood's fight and come to join the resistance.